It's incredible to think that the entire course of a war, the fate of a nation, could be changed by a single piece of metal, no bigger than a symbol. Well, that's exactly what this story is about. It all starts with this number. Just a number sitting in a file, 2,300. But in 1940, this number represented a crisis that was quietly losing the war for Great Britain. So, what is that number? Well, that's the number of times a British pilot, right in the middle of a life-or-death dogfight, had their engine just give up on them. This wasn't random bad luck. It was a fundamental design flaw, a weakness so well known that the enemy even had a name for it. And this right here, this quote from a Spitfire pilot, it just hits you in the gut. Just imagine that. You've got a Messerschmitt in your sights. You push the stick forward to dive and finish him, and your engine just quits. The German pilot? He doesn't even bother looking over his shoulder. He knows. He knows exactly what just happened. Your own plane just betrayed you. Yeah, the Germans actually called it the English disease, and their pilots were trained to use it as a weapon. The tactic was brutally simple. If a Spitfire or a Hurricane gets on your tail, just shove the stick forward and dive. You knew the British engine would choke, giving you the perfect chance to escape, or, worse, turn the tables and shoot them down while they were helpless. So what was going on? Why was this happening? It all came down to a huge difference in engine philosophy, which you can see laid out right here. The legendary British Merlin engine used a float carburetor, which is actually kind of similar to what you'd find in an old car. The German DB601 engine, on the other hand, used a much more advanced direct fuel injection system. And that one single difference was literally a matter of life and death. Okay, so let's break down this chain reaction of failure. When a British pilot pushed the stick forward to dive, it created something called negative G-force. All the fuel in this little part called the float chamber would slosh upwards, completely flooding the carburetor. The engine would literally drown in its own fuel. And for 2, maybe 3 critical seconds, an absolute eternity in a dogfight, the pilot had no power. Now, the crazy thing is, Rolls-Royce knew this was a problem. Of course they did. Their engineers were already designing a proper long-term fix, a totally new pressure carburetor. But here's the catch. It wasn't going to be ready until 1943. 3 years. Britain didn't have 3 years. They were fighting for their survival right now. So the official solution was just way too far off. The problem needed to be solved now. And the answer wasn't going to come from a big corporate committee or some stuffy design bureau. Nope, it was going to come from a total outsider, a woman who understood engines not just from textbooks, but from pushing them to their absolute screaming limit. And her name was Beatrice Schilling. Everybody called her Tilly. I mean, just look at this timeline. At 14 years old, she's buying and rebuilding motorcycles. She was one of only 2 women in her entire university engineering program. She was a daredevil motorcycle racer hitting over 100 miles an hour. By 1936, she's the only female engineer at the prestigious Royal Aircraft Establishment. She didn't just understand theory, she had grease under her fingernails. And this quote from her, it tells you everything you need to know about her mindset. Textbooks teach you theory. Racing teaches you survival. She knew from firsthand, terrifying experience that a theoretically perfect design is worthless if it fails you when it counts. So fast forward to 1940, Schilling is working at the RAE, and that file with those 2,300 engine failure reports lands on her desk. While all the other engineers were thinking about these huge, complex, long-term redesigns, her racing experience led her to see the problem in a completely different way. See, she realized the root of the problem wasn't a flaw in the carburetor's core design. It was simpler than that. It was just getting way too much fuel all at once. So she asked a question that was so simple it was genius. Instead of redesigning the whole thing, why don't we just stop it from drowning itself? And this was her solution. It's almost elegant in its simplicity. It's a small brass disc, basically a washer, with a tiny, precisely drilled hole in the middle. The hole was just big enough to let through the maximum fuel the engine needed her full power, but it was too small to let through the sudden, catastrophic surge of fuel during a negative G dive. That's it. That's the entire invention. Okay, so she had it. The device worked perfectly in tests. But now she was facing an even bigger enemy than a German fighter plane, bureaucracy. Getting this thing officially approved would take months of paperwork and testing, months they just didn't have. And so, Beatrice Schilling made a decision that could have gotten her thrown in prison. How long would the official testing and authorization process take? 6 months. 6. All while pilots were dying every single day from a problem that she knew right then and there how to fix. Yeah, she wasn't waiting. She literally got on her Norton motorcycle, the same one she used to race, stuffed a handful of these handmade restrictors in her pocket, and rode straight to a frontline fighter base. She went completely around the official chain of command, found a sympathetic mechanic, and convinced him to help her install a completely illegal, unauthorized modification on a Spitfire. So they do it in secret. They install the device in the plane of a pilot named Al Deer without even telling him what they've done. He goes up on patrol, gets into a fight with 2 Messerschmitts, dives on them, and the engine performs perfectly. He lands absolutely ecstatic and basically demands, "I don't know what you guys did to my plane, but I want it on every single Spitfire in this squadron, now." The gamble paid off. Well, you can imagine what happened next. Word spread like wildfire up the chain of command. But Schilling didn't get court-martialed. Instead, she gets a phone call from the top man himself, Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, the commander of Fighter Command. And his order was simple. How fast can you get this into every one of my aircraft? What she did next is, honestly, almost as incredible as the invention itself. She got back on her motorcycle and spent the next 4 weeks on what became known as the 4-week Blitz. She personally wrote to 43 different fighter stations all across England. She trained the ground crews herself, supervised the installations, basically living out of a saddlebag for a month, driven by pure urgency to get this done. And the impact? It was immediate and it was absolutely staggering. Just look at these numbers. This table compares the month before her fix with the month after. Engine cutouts during a dive? They dropped from a crippling 41% down to almost 0. British fighter losses were nearly cut in half. And the kill-to-loss ratio? It more than doubled. This wasn't a minor improvement. It was a revolution. Yeah, this chart really drives it home. In March, for every 1.4 German planes the RAF shot down, they lost one of their own. After a fix in April, that number skyrockets to 3.1 German planes for every 1 British loss. All of a sudden, RAF pilots were winning fights they absolutely would have lost just a month before. The pilots, of course, with their typical gallows humor, came up with their own, let's call it a colorful nickname for her invention. They called it Miss Schilling's Orifice. But when she heard about it, she wasn't offended in the slightest. Her response was just perfect. Pure Schilling. If a dirty joke helps pilots remember who saved them, I'll take it. But maybe the most important impact wasn't something you can even measure with statistics. It was psychological. It was about morale. Just listen to this quote from the legendary ace Douglas Bader. He said, "She gave them their confidence back. They were no longer afraid of their own aircraft. They could finally fight aggressively, dive without hesitation, and truly take the fight to the enemy." So the story of Beatrice Schilling is an amazing tale of engineering genius, for sure. But it's more than that, isn't it? It really makes you stop and think. Who are the people that really push history forward? Is it the big organizations that follow all the rules and procedures? Or is it the individuals? The ones with the brilliance and the sheer nerve to break them when it really matters?